This right here is the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G. And you're probably thinking, wait, haven't you guys already reviewed some of these phones? In fact, yes, we have. We reviewed the Note 14 and the Pro Plus 5G, just to make it confusing. Both were in fact the Chinese versions of the same Redmi Note. Now that there's been a global release for all these here in Europe, we thought we'd grab the Pro version to give you some of the differences between that and the Chinese version. And there are some differences, twofold, mainly in the cameras and in the battery. And the rear camera on the Redmi Note 14 Pro is actually 200 megapixels, but what does it actually mean in terms of performance in the real world? As stated, 200 megapixels is the main camera lens, and the other two are a massive downgrade compared to that in terms of megapixel count, and that's an 8 megapixel ultra wide and a rather pointless 2 megapixel macro lens. But how does that work in the real world when you're testing your Redmi Note 14 Pro and you're out and about taking photos? You get good to decent quality photos. Again, Xiaomi is running really a lot of their photography computation is AI based, so you're going to get a lot of rendering in AI, and it'll essentially adjust things in its own way to make it look how it thinks it should look, and that is essentially saturated and very bright and vibrant, which may be perfect for a lot of people, but for some people who work a more flatter tone, it may not be the right thing for you. But you can change and adjust a lot of these filters to get that level. We're just using a basic camera as it comes in the box. Overall, camera quality is actually good at this price point. So this comes in at around about £350, and then that ultra wide at 8 megapixel puts out decent results. You do get some vignetting and ghosting along the sides, which is unfortunately can happen because the lens at 8 megapixels is probably not large enough to capture as much light and information as you'd want it to. 2 megapixel macro is, yeah, a 2 megapixel macro. It'll output to some extent a decent photo, but it does take a lot of work. And then on the rear cameras, when it comes to video, you get 4K 30 FPS, 1080p 30 FPS on the front, and video quality across both is relatively good. You do get really good performance in terms of color, in terms of balance as well. And then generally speaking, across the board in the whole camera system, I think if you were to zoom in and try to capture that extra detail, you do get a lot of noise, and that will impact how you take your photos and your videos. Then let's talk about a couple of other key performance indicators, and that is the chipset that lives inside the Redmi Note 14 Pro. So that Dimensity 7300 Ultra is actually a downgrade compared to the Poco X7 Pro that we reviewed recently that has an 8400 Ultra chip. So there's like a generation behind, which is pretty weird why they've done this, but nevertheless, we power on. It is a boost from last year's 7S Gen 2, but the differences are very, very subtle. But what you're going to see in the real world terms is good overall performance when it comes to things like gaming. So you'll get decent frame rates here across the board with a good amount of graphics. So if you're using things like Call of Duty as an example, it will run reasonably well without any real issues. But if you wanted to really push this game to say a Genshin Impact level, it's probably gonna struggle. In fact, it will struggle to actually output at a good level without any slowdown and judder and dropped frame rates. So if you're a serious gamer and you're looking for a budget phone that'll fit that gap, probably avoid the Redmi Note 14 Pro for that reason. But for everything else, things like running the OS, runs very, very well. HyperOS out of the box. It is running Android 14 out of the box as well, not 15, just to clarify, which supposedly this will get an upgrade really soon, I believe by March, and we'll get HyperOS 2.0, but it does mean that you're losing a single update software cycle right out of the box within a few months of buying, which is a downside. For everything else though, in terms of general day-to-day performance and everything else, it runs very, very well. And the 120 Hz display and that beautiful AMOLED display on the front does a great job of rendering a lot of the graphics as well as showcasing everything in a nice and vibrant way. The display, 6.67 inch, 1.5K resolution, and you get 3000 plus nits of brightness as well. And whenever you're watching content on the display, it looks really, really punchy and vibrant. So if this is a trailer for a movie, or if it's a TV show or any content you're watching, all of that will run really, really well, and those colors will pop really well on that AMOLED display. There's claims of billions of colors as well, but generally speaking, to keep it simple, the display is excellent and performs really, really well. It is curved as well along the sides here. It is actually curved on the sides, which does make a difference. It does feel easier to hold in the hand than some things, for example, like the Poco X7 Pro. That is still quite easy to hold in your hand, but this does feel a little bit more comfortable because of the contours on the side. And generally speaking, the design as a whole is really, really good. Now, one of the two differences that we wanted to talk about when it came to the Chinese version of this particular phone compared to the global version is battery capacity. So 5,110 milliamp hours here in the UK at 45 watts. It's 5,500 in China, and then you do get faster charging speeds again. And then when it comes to camera lenses, let's quickly touch on those. You get 200, 8 and 2 here, which is a complete one. On the Chinese version, you get 50, 50 and 8. So there's a significant difference in terms of the camera specs as well. And those 50s are 50 wide, 50 telephoto, 8 megapixel ultra wide. So the differences are pretty big, and I would encourage you to watch our review of the Redmi Note 14 Pro Plus 5G to get our full thoughts on that version of the phone, which isn't unfortunately available here in Europe, but you can get it through AliExpress via the link in our description. But the Redmi Note 14 Pro, what are our final thoughts on this phone that costs around £349? So then let's talk about the general feelings we have for the Redmi Note 14 Pro. It's a very, very good smartphone, has tons of really great features, really fast charging, good battery, generally performance is really good, and will fit the needs of the majority of the people who want to use a smartphone for sort of the basic needs, as well as some casual gaming, browsing, watching content, etc. It's very good. The biggest problem the Redmi Note 14 Pro has, in fact, is the Poco X7 Pro. That offers better performance. I would say overall, in terms of balance, maybe better overall camera experience. It will charge much faster, has a much better battery life as well. So all those components probably make it a better buy. But weirdly, it's actually cheaper than the Redmi Note 14 Pro as well, which kind of makes no sense, but there you go, that's a Xiaomi thing, I guess. Overall though, if you're in the market for an upgrade to say your existing Redmi phone, or you wanted to have a phone for a budget around £400, this is definitely worth a consideration. Personally, we would default to the Poco X7 Pro, as that's probably the better of the two phones. And that's our review of the Redmi Note 14 Pro. We do have a quick requirement though. If you like this video, let us know, would you buy a Redmi Note 14 Pro, yes or no? Chuck it in the comment section, and we'll see you for the next one. Peace out.